this is sort of, there's a little bit of a reunion for us because 2 years ago at LA Film Festival, I got to do a conversation with Steve and Ludwig, specifically about their collaboration with Ryan Coogler, the writer and director of Black Panther. This is only Ryan's third film, which is kind of astonishing to me. He started off making a huge splash a few years ago with an amazing film called Fruitvale Station, which if you haven't seen, you definitely should. And then his next film was Creed, which was also a fantastic film, and now Black Panther. So 2 years ago, we had this conversation about the way Ryan uses sound and music in a unique and distinctive way in his films. And I remember before we started the panel, he showed up and he said, "I'm sorry, I'm so tired, but I'm on deadline. I got to turn in the script for this Black Panther movie tonight." So, and then here we are 2 years later talking about Black Panther, which is kind of amazing and trippy. But one of the things that came out, and you'll notice if you watch the movie Fruitvale Station, it's a low-budget, independent movie that takes place in Oakland that has unbelievably sophisticated sound design and music, especially for a first-time director. So Ryan is a director who really understands how to use these tools creatively to tell the story. And so the first question that I have for you guys, so our esteemed panelists today are supervising sound editor, re-recording mixer, and sound designer Steve Boeddeker, who received yeah, absolutely.
No, please.
Who I'm gonna embarrass these guys just a little bit. Who got an Oscar nomination for some amazing work in the movie All Is Lost, and you're just now working again with the same director again on his new film. Yep. And obviously, you had started doing some work with Ryan on Fruitvale Station, and before you went off to do All Is Lost, you worked on Creed. Ludwig Göranssonand, the composer, you've been working with Ryan since you guys were in film school. Is that?
Yeah, since our days at USC, like 11 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you guys first, having this long-term relationship and working relationship with Ryan, can you talk a little bit about his approach to sound and music and why it's important to him and how his approach has kind of changed as the movies have gotten bigger?
Well, I can start because it's funny because the first film we did together was a student short, like it's called the 508. It was at USC. He was studying at the director's program, and I was studying in the film music program. And the first film was a 5-minute short, which didn't have any dialogues. It was just sounds and music. And that's like I remember how interested Ryan was in just like in the sound and experimenting and how we can combine music and sound together. So that's always been something we've been talking about in his movies, and especially when we started with his first feature film, Fruitvale Station. He asked me, like, is there any way we can use the BART the BART train? It takes place on the BART train station. So you guys went and recorded the BART train, and then you sent me the audio files, and I took them into my music programs and kind of warped them up and pitch shifted them and experimented with the train sounds and kind of put them into the score as musical elements. And then for Creed, I went up to Oakland to a boxing gym and spent about 2 days in the gym recording a boxer punching, working out, training the jump rope, and I had 2 sound designers later on that kind of turned those sounds into loops and helped me make musical elements out of those sounds. For Black Panther, it was a little different because what I ended up doing was I went to Africa and it's not just about sound, it's African music. So sound is such a big part of it. Like there's instruments with sounds that you never really heard before, and like you haven't really heard in any kind of movies before. But it was on such a different scale. Like it was not just 2 days of recording some African drums, but like I really needed to study the music and learn because it was extremely complicated, and so it was definitely like, you know, a different scale of learning and recording music and sound.
And actually, what Ludwig is describing is sort of my secret weapon for sound design, because as a composer, I mean, first of all, it's an honor to mix his music. And with the history that he and Ryan have, they kind of share the same creative brain. But also, the work that he puts into his score is my secret weapon for doing sound design, because if you pay attention to what he's doing in his demos in the music, you can see exactly where we're supposed to go with the sound design. You can tell what the emotion is supposed to be. And not to be self-deprecating, but his music mixes itself. It tells you where it's supposed to be. It tells you how loud it's going to be. When we were doing Creed, we had the whole montage of the working out and exercising. And the first time I heard it, it was so incredible. I just played it way louder than I thought was probably appropriate, but was very fun. And then I turned around and I looked, and everybody else was smiling and having like a really good time. And so that was it. That was just what we did. And we did a lot of that same type of thing with Black Panther. I just followed the lead that Ludwig created with the score that he had written and delivered, even from the demos. In fact, there's one point, there was one of my favorite cues is after Killmonger says, "Burn it all." And everything's on fire, and this music is coming in, and I believe it's just like da 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 da. It's building, it's building, it's building, and then it's 808s, and it was just too cool to ignore.
Yeah, the shot is upside down.
Yeah. It goes
is
upside down. Everything about it was just like really cool, and it's like you're playing it, and as the music is building and building, you just feel like it has to get louder and louder. You just can't do it any other way. It was great. So
I think you actually blew out the speakers at Disney at that time, the way you mixed it.
Sorry.
Not that we're proud of blowing out speakers, but yes, that's always a fun day. So Ludwig, this movie is obviously kind of, just in terms of size and scope, so much bigger than what you guys have done in the past. And I'm intrigued by the combination of what is a pretty big, lush symphonic score, but also with a lot of African rhythms and instrumentation. So what research did you do to get ready for this, and how did you kind of put all of this together into a cohesive set of music for the film?
Well, after I read the script, I mean, even before they started shooting, I read the script, and I told Ryan, like, the only way I would be able to make this project, make the music work, is to go to Africa and study African music and really dive into it, and so. And he was really on board with that. I mean, that was kind of the plan from the beginning, because it all takes place in Wakanda, and we're seeing these, you know, we're in this environments, and so anyway, so I went to West Africa, to Senegal, because I did a little bit of research, and I like something that I really was interested in was kind of sabar drums, which and the talking drum. And West Africa is kind of famous for the energy of the percussion, and I so I went to West Africa, and I got linked up with a musician, a very famous African musician. His name is Baba Mal, and he kind of took me under his wings, and I went on tour with him for a week, and in different small little villages, and just went on to see him play with this group, and that was like kind of a very important moment, to like being let in by him, and like being around the music and the culture for about 1 to 2 weeks, and I got to know, he introduced me to some incredible musicians, and like one of the instruments that I've always been interested in is the talking drum, which is. That's just what you heard in that music, in that entrance. You hear the first thing you hear is the talking drum, and it's kind of like it almost sounds like a voice. It's because you can talk with it, like you can play different pitches with it. So it's also it's like a first type of communication device. It's the first type of telephone. Like you can play these messages and send them to, you know, miles away, because it's so loud. So that's kind of, and the talking drum kind of became T'Challa's sound, and his theme is actually T'Challa played on the talking drum. It's a rhythm that you hear constantly over and over again whenever T'Challa enters. It's like "bu-du-du, du-du-du." That's his name. So that's just a little part of the research that went into it, but yeah.
Yeah, but there's so much music in this that's happening on screen. Yeah. There's so much music that's being performed. So at what point did you get involved? You said you read the script, but obviously there seems like there was a tremendous amount of music that had to be prepared for the shoot.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah. So there's a waterfall scene, a waterfall fight with M'Baku when he's challenging T'Challa, and they go, this is a beautiful waterfall, and if there's a fight taking place, and there's actually live music on by the sides of the waterfall. There's some live musicians playing, and you can also see the whole audience kind of bursting into chants of T'Challa, and that's actually the rhythm that the talking drums are playing. So it was a lot of preparation that went into me like doing all this research before we started shooting. But then the most difficult part was to like have the whole focus of the score being African music, but then we also needed to bring in the orchestra to kind of make it like a cinematic sound and make it feel big, really big, huge at times, but it was very challenging to have the orchestra fit in under the African music, and not the opposite ways. So that was one of the biggest challenging moments of the score, and then there's a third element, which is kind of the hip hop production with the 808s, which is kind of a modern. That's a modern sound of African music. So that was kind of an easy part.
One of the things that I remember we talked about last time that I've really enjoyed about all three of Ryan's films is oftentimes I'm not sure if what I'm hearing is music or sound design. And I would love for you guys to talk about this sequence just for a moment and talk about like your collaboration and how you guys work together. And what are the conversations that you're having, and what are the spotting sessions with Ryan like, and how does this kind of seamless blend of music and sound design happen?
He's looking at me. You talk. Actually, it's interesting because our approach to the sound design and the mix was very similar to what Ludwig was just describing about the music. There's sort of these three different characteristics. You have this culture that has developed this very advanced technology, and so the sounds need to have some advanced kind of almost sci-fi-ish character to them. However, if you look at technology and how it's advanced just within our own lifetime, you see that it doesn't get spacey sounding. It doesn't get sci-fi, and if anything, design tends to be grounded in the culture of where it came from. So a lot of the sounds of the technology that you hear are created from sounds from West Africa, whether it's percussion. A lot of the weapons have African percussion within the sounds of the weapons. The ships, if you hear them go by, that weird little wah thing is actually a slowed down call of an African bird. So we were trying to maintain as much kind of African stuff buried within the sounds, but also have enough layers so that as the music was coming in, and especially the orchestral part of it, and we were going beyond the demos, that we were able to make sure that everything worked together nicely and played together nicely. And I get to mix music and the sound design, and so to me, the best way to make sure that they both have a place is if they're designed to both have a place, if that makes any sense.
You want to elaborate on that?
That was the first.
This sequence is just amazing to me because it starts off with this very, very powerful rhythmic, but then the symphonic score comes in. And how did you? I mean, it was such a challenge.
They're playing it. That's what I thought was so cool about the way this was designed musically. Is they're playing in the beginning and then it's score. And then we cut inside, and it's this homage to Creed when Adonis is walking out to get ready for his big fight. So in this case, it's T'Challa walking out of the ship, and you hear the chants, and you hear all that stuff, and it's the people, and then it's the score. It's just, yeah. Sorry, I like your music.
It's just, it's just so important to have a relationship, with and have a good team, because the only reason that we can make this work was because I we both been working with Ryan for such a long time, and we were involved so early. So even before like he's done with the first version of the script, I can read it. I can go and do my research and learn and study, for a month or for 2 months, and then come back and just start to experiment, because it was, we recorded and recorded a lot of traditional African music and worked with a lot of musicians over there, and I learned so much. But then just like Steve said, like this is, in their culture, they also have the most modern technology, so how do you take that traditional music and make it with a new updated modern twist, using orchestral elements, using hip hop production, and that takes a lot of time. So while they were shooting, I was able to try to craft and produce and work out, trying to come up with new sounds and new ideas. So like you have like these talking drum, a group of 7 talking drum players playing this talking drum pattern, and then underneath it there's like an 808 kind of doubling the sound of it, which kind of gives it a whole new approach. And so for this scene, for example, like I was on set in Atlanta, and we had live music being played on set. So what you're seeing there is kind of what
So was it sort of like a musical? Did you do a pre-record session that then became on-set playback, or how?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure people are fascinated by the process. So like, how much did you have to have ready for production, and then were you even thinking about the symphonic part of the score until at that point, or didn't come in until post-production, or how did you rough out and prepare materials for cutting and then for Steve to start using?
Well, I was thinking about the symphonic part the whole time, because I was like, how the hell am I gonna get the symphonic orchestra in here and make it sound, but still make it sound African, like African music? So I was thinking about that for about a year, and it took me that long of a time to really figure out how to use it in an appropriate way. Yeah.
And I'm curious. I always love to hear about the process. So, what was the temping process? Did you guys do multiple temp mixes and for test screenings, or how did that go?
Not really. They generally try to keep stuff in-house. I mean, Disney has a huge number of people that they can kind of pull from, audiences that they can show it to. And so they're kind of constantly showing it to small groups of people and getting feedback that way. But for me, because I knew, the music that I was hearing in every turnover that we were getting was coming from Ludwig, so it was a perfect guide for me. So I was permanently temping, basically. So every time I would be working on a new scene, or when it even came time to pre-dub, I was pre-dubbing with the music that I was pretty sure was going to be in the final.
And was that roughed out electronic versions of a symphonic score, or at what level were things?
Yeah, there was I guess samples of orchestral stuff that was going with it. In fact, there was one point that we got the real orchestra, and it was so much louder than it had been prior that I was worried that we were starting to tip too far into the big movie side of things and not just stick to the Wakanda and 808 kind of stuff. And I actually called the music editor, Ron Webb. I was like, is this on purpose? Is this something I should be following through? And he said, no, it's the new recordings that we just got. They haven't even been mixed in, but we wanted you to have them for reference. The balance that was created in the demos stuck. That's what we stayed with. And I think the only time we ever changed anything from the way Ludwig had intended and the way Ryan had heard all along is just how we spread stuff out around the room.
And what's very different, the way Ryan Coogler works in terms of most other directors, is that he never puts any temp music in his films. So I think that was like a big shocker for Marvel when they're working on storyboards. Usually there's animations, and usually they need music there to be able to look at the storyboards and they be able to get a sense of what feeling we're going for. But Ryan was like, no, I don't want any kind of music in except for Ludwig's demos, which also made it kind of...
That's a lot of pressure on you.
A lot of pressure on me, because the first cut, like I thought I mentioned this earlier, the first cut is like 3.5 hours, so I need to. So that's a lot of scenes to cover.
And I'm always curious, were there any blind alleys that you got that you went down from a score perspective, and you tried something and was like, yeah, that just doesn't work. We have to pivot.
I don't think so.
Perfect. You got it right the first time. All right. So
nailed it.
So Steve, those kind of those are almost dream sequences, and they give you quite a bit of room for a little bit more impressionistic treatment of sound. So can you talk about your approach to mixing the sounds for those sequences when after he's taken in the kind of the Black Panther potion and takes the spiritual journey? How did the sound for those scenes come together?
Well, first, it just popped into my head. This is a prime example of one where the music tells you how it should be mixed, because it goes away. We took everything out so that we could just hear the reverb coming off of his voice, and it was just this loneliest of moments. But then as the orchestra starts to come out and it's building, even now, I still get this kind of tingling feeling of this is a building emotional thing. So it just tells you how to mix that. Now, one of the tricks, and I have to give a huge shout out to my friend and co-mixer, Brandon Proctor, when he was mixing this sequence, he cleaned the dialogue, and he turned to me and he was like, I'm worried that it's so clean it might feel disembodied. But we decided to go with that because they're in this weird place. And what ended up happening is
they kind of are literally disembodied in this place. So thematically it works. Yeah.
But what ended up happening is because he had done it like that, we were able to take everything out so that we could have those voices be so clean and that you could give a moment to just the decay of his voice. And so what he said became the critically important thing at that moment. And then the music and the emotion that follows from that comes swelling up with the music. Another thing that was kind of just a trip was that I was trying to make some sounds for some of the technology, and I made this by accident, this weird kind of tone that was kind of undulating, and I thought it would be cool in this scene, but I was worried because it changes and it modulates over time. And I put it in and played it with Ludwig's music, and it's like, oh wow, this is in key with the, oh, it's not. Oh wait, it's in again. Oh, it's not. And it made for this weird kind of discord sometimes that I think helped out the sequence as far as like feeling that you're in this other place and it's beautiful, or is it? But anyway, yeah, like I said, the main thing I wanted to point out was how that music comes back in at the end. It just tells you how to mix it, so.
There are two big fights that happen, the ceremonial fights that happen in this space at the waterfall. So obviously, you know, you got a lot of there's a lot of the big crowds, big waterfall, big action, big music. How do you how do you make this into a cohesive sound experience during the mix, Steve?
Big headaches. It is. It's a lot of stuff. And anyone who's ever been to a waterfall, like if you go to Yosemite or something like that, you know it can be just this continuous, relentless white noise that tends to suck up everything. So we tried as much as possible to take advantage of Atmos and put some of the waterfall stuff up in the ceiling and off to the sides, and then just do specific waterfall things for that. Now, as far as the sound design and the fight itself, Ryan was very adamant that it be brutal and timeless. There was nothing new. There's no Wakanda technology in this. This is a ritual that has been happening for generations and generations, and these guys are both stripped of any of their powers, so it's man on man. So that was like critically important. And fortunately, you know, the music is playing in frequencies that are completely different than what we were doing with the sound effects. And I think that's just, I would say it was serendipity, but I think it was thought out pretty well in advance by someone. I'm not sure who. But like having that kind of brass in there, that doesn't affect any of the stuff that we were doing in the sound effects.
Yeah, and it's the notes that you're talking to Ryan about having it being timeless, and it's musically, like for the actual fights, there was almost only drums, and we had I recorded a big sabar ensemble in Senegal that I'd later on when we got the picture, this is before I had the picture, so later on when I had the picture I kind of had to recut it and redo it and retime it, and then I worked with my engineer that records all my music, Chris Vogel, on how to really make these drums really punchy and like really update the quality of the recording. So in terms of, you know, these are rituals, the fighting rituals is a challenge between M'Baku and T'Challa. Here's a challenge between Killmonger and T'Challa. And something I was working with the musicians that I met, it was like there's actual challenge rhythms in drum rhythms in African music that were written 1,000 years ago, and being able to have, you know, to take those to use those rhythms in the music that was actually written for a moment like this is something that me and Ryan was talking about, and that's what we did. And so the drum rhythms you're hearing in the fights is actually a rhythm that was specifically written for a challenge moment.
It's amazing. Before we take a couple of questions, I mean, we focused on Wakanda through the clips and through this, but there's also amazing design and music sequences. There's a whole set piece, huge set piece that happens in Korea with that extraordinary car chase, which is an amazing sound design moment. You've also got Oakland in the early 90s, and I noticed you guys worked some of those Bart sounds back in there again. So there's really just a lot of extraordinary sound design and music moments in this film that we didn't even show clips for. But I did want to open up to the audience and see if you guys have any questions for Ludwig and Steve. Yes, right here.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's an incredible production. I appreciate you describing it. I had a question on the clip we watched before this, where they're hitting their spears before the waterfall, and we go into that. You know, we hear this music, and then we hear almost. It sounds. I assume it's music. It's almost like whispering when we're going underwater. It's that. Is that a part of the music? And in regards to it's incredible when you do that. Is this something you score, you know, with samplers and synthesizers and then record, or do you record instruments as part of your whole scoring process? I was very interested because they're very together when I hear this. So it's very interesting.
That is so the part we hear where you go underwater is it's actually voices. Is about 10 men. And so when I spent about 3 weeks in Senegal, and I lived in a house, and the last day of recording, I kind of gathered every man in the house that was kind of staying there and working there. It was in a city called outside. It was in a city outside Dakar, and I was like, "Hey guys, do you guys want to just record some vocal sounds?" So we spent like 3 hours just making random vocal sounds with like 10 men that I've been hanging out with for 3 weeks, and like a lot of them was just like we actually just made up like sounds on the spot, like, and something. I was asking, what kind of sounds do you guys do at Senegalese wrestling games? What sounds do you do at sports events? And sounds like that. And the sound that we're hearing when they're underwater is like it's kind of a chant that sounds like hasha 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 hasha. And I thought that was really cool. And Ryan loved that sound too. So I don't know why I decided to put it into the underwater scene, but I think it fitted the tempo I was in, and I was like, oh, this is really cool, and it sounds kind of like magical, and I don't know, it floated in pretty well.
Hey, thank you guys so much for all the masterful work that you put into this movie. Like, really, thank you a lot for like just elevating the craft. My question is, it sounds like that you've made a lot of original sound designs and samples, but what's the ratio between like the original sounds that you guys are creating and like the possibility of y'all using VSTs or plugins? And like, I'm also kind of curious as to, are you using Ableton, Logic, Pro Tools? Like what is the DAW that you use to mix and produce?
Well, pretty much everything's in Pro Tools. Very little actually synthetic stuff in the design. It was interesting because David Hughes, who's the sound designer that worked with me on this, we decided to try and for the technology stuff, split it up, and he would go and do things with organic stuff and instruments, percussion, the birds and things like that. And I did a bunch of synthetic things. Particularly for the ships, we ended up making things that were very similar. It was very odd. You know, for the buys especially, that weird little and of course we went with the ones that were the African birds because that had, you know, more of an authentic, real feel to it. But we try as much as possible to have things be recorded and as organic as possible for the source material. Plugins, I use anything and everything I can find if I feel like I need to process stuff. A lot of the layering for me was done with Contact. We used a bunch of Reactor stuff. That one sound that I made that was the weird undulating thing that was a complete accident was in Reactor. It was one of the sound generating ensemble things. And I was going through and I was tweaking all these things, and it was not what I was trying to make by a long shot. But for me, I love putting myself in a position where I might accidentally stumble upon something. And if you can recognize what it can be useful for, even if you can't, just record it and have it and keep it in the back of your mind. But yeah, pretty much all Pro Tools based.
I did, for what I did with my musical elements, it's like almost everything that you hear is, I don't, like all the African elements was actually, most of them were recorded in Senegal, and then I kind of cut them up and make kind of, some of the instruments that I recorded I kind of cut up and put into Contact and make as, you know, my own synthesizers from it. And all my audio I put into Ableton. And in Ableton, I'm able to pitch it, time stretch it, you know, make it different. And then the plugins I'm using on the African instruments is, I tried to experiment a lot with plugins because that was a way to kind of take these old traditional sounds and kind of update them. You know, for example, for like the Fula flute that I'm using, that's kind of Killmonger's theme. I have a lot of I use a lot of distortion and some kind of tape delay to make it sound like kind of like almost like a modern sample. So that was just an experimental phase that I went through to see what kind of plugins I can use on organic traditional African instruments to make them just take on a different color.
Great. Well, I could go for another hour, but unfortunately that's all the time that we have. I wanted to thank Ludwig and Steve for coming out and talking to us today about the sound and music of Black Panther. Thanks, everyone.